like that. Peggy, do you want to talk to us a little bit about the raffle prizes? If you guys put fines on the fines table while Peggy's coming up to talk, give us a favor, put your name with your fine, please. Sorry.
Okay, well, every month, I see a lot of new faces in here, and it's wonderful. We have a 50-50, we have a silver, we have a beautiful Morgan dollar, and a Standing Liberty, Walker, sorry about that. And then the mystery raffle, I compile a bunch of goodies in there, and it can be silver coins, it can be anything. But I will tell you that usually the mystery raffle monetarily is more than the silver. Some good stuff in there today, and so you buy one ticket, it's $1. You go for the better buy, you spend $5, get 6 tickets, and we will take as much money as you want to give us. Thank you.
He's gone.
He's gone.
All right. So Peggy's leading the meeting.
No, she's not. And if you haven't done memberships, Al has been kind enough to do that. So
He don't have to stand up, do he?
You guys recall the email thing?
I got no clue. If I was, I hope you were happy with me.
I showed up.
There you go. Now I'm even happier you showed up. I like guys like you.
So do I get to give someone $30?
Go see Al. There you go. I love guys like him. Do I see you about the money? Sure. So we're going to have a financial report. If you look on your tables, you should have a couple pieces of paper that look like this. Larry's going to give a report real quick for us. The most exciting news, can I steal some of your thunder, Larry?
No, tell him no.
The most exciting news is we got an official checking account. I know, it's only been a year, give us a hand.
Well, it won't take long to get through this. The balance sheet shows we're in pretty good shape for the newness of the club and the big event we had at the end of the year. So if you'll turn to the second page, you'll see January's profit and loss statement. Total income of $940 and expenses of $45. So a great month of profit, and we're off to a good start. Thank you all for your participation in the raffles and the memberships. So if you haven't got your memberships done yet this year, anytime you can catch Al back there at the raffle table and he can get that handled. Thank you so much. Any questions? I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Larry. Guys, give Larry a huge round of applause. We so appreciate him. He has been keeping us straight longer than I can remember, and I really, really thank him for that. Now, don't let that report fool you. It looks like we're way ahead, but we're still behind. I know that sounds crazy. I look forward a lot, and I got some forward vision that might catch you off guard. So we have that seeded hunt coming up. When's that first seeded hunt? Is that right around May? And we're going to throw $1,000 out there, which means right now we're $100 behind. We'll get there. We're not worried. But I'm just letting you know, that's the things we do. We take in the money from you guys. We try to give back as much as possible to you guys. Your club, your money, we want you to have it. Next up, we're going to bring Rob Johnson. He wants to talk a little bit about an idea, business sponsorships. If you guys look on your tables right now, we put out a list of Friends of the Treasure Valley Metal Detecting Club. These are actually donors and members of the club who have businesses. We put that together free of charge, but Rob has some things he wants to talk about.
How are you all doing? Good. Can you hear me in the back? If you can't, be quiet. All right. I'm just messing with you. All right. So as a board, we were thinking about generating money, being able to use that money for great events like seated hunts and barbecues and things along those natures. So for this year, we have a Friends of the Treasure Valley Metal Detecting Club, which is traditionally $100 to be on that list. If you're a member of the club and you own a business, I know James back there has an Etsy thing, right? He sells pictures of his face or something. I don't know. I'm just joking. But if you have a business, we want to thank you for coming to our club meeting. We want to thank you for the business that you do, but also we want to put that business on our website to give you a little bit more exposure. Put it on we'll do some business spotlights and things like that. Now, there's a few realtors in the club, okay? We want, Rich is a realtor. Is anybody else a realtor? What's your name, mate? Claire. What? Claire, he's a realtor. I'm not a realtor. But if you own a business, I've got a sign-up sheet. It's pretty easy. Just put the information on there. That'll be handed to the IT guy. He will then put it on to our website with links and all that sort of stuff. This is free to you as a thank you. So thank you. Any questions? Oh, if you've got a business card, just hand it over here. Okay? Give it to Jason. Any other questions other than Rich? So it might not seem like a big thing, but Jason's in IT. I do a little bit of marketing. What happens is when we put your website on our website, it creates a personal blog network, a PBN, I think it's called, something like that. So that's cross-traffic from our website to your website, which strengthens your website to help it become more noticeable through Google. So that's one of the things that we're bringing to the table for you as members, and it's free of charge. If you do have any other business contacts who do not belong to the club, who want to be part of this, they have two options. Join the club for $30 or pay us $99. I know which one I would choose. So, yeah. So thank you for your time. I'll hand this in to List.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Matt.
All righty. So tonight we are having a very, very special guest. You guys know what Carpe Diem means. Seize the day, right? I was at a different club, and there was this gentleman talking about rocks. I'm like, well, okay, rocks are cool. And they were kind of fun to listen about. And then he made a vital error. He goes, I know a guy in town who knows everything there is to know about meteorites. What? And he's willing to talk to people. So I gave this gentleman a call on the phone. It was my pleasure to meet. I think we talked for an hour. It was like we were old friends, Told him a little bit about me, about the club, what it is we're trying to accomplish. He goes, Rich, I'm going to come to your club and I'm going to do the presentation. Now, most members or most guest speakers show up like 5 minutes before they're supposed to talk. He was here an hour ahead of time setting up his table. He has an interactive table. You get to press buttons and stuff, and for me, well, I kind of like that. Anyway, this gentleman has been married 50 years to the same woman, so obviously she has a screw loose because she's still with him. You know what I'm saying? That's just the way it works, guys. He is incredibly knowledgeable. His best meteorites are at the gem show this weekend.
Well, they're currently in boxes waiting to go down to the gem show.
Where is the gem show this weekend?
It's at the fairgrounds.
It's at the fairgrounds. How much does it cost to get in?
I think it's $5.
$5 to get in to see a bunch of rocks. I'm going to pay $5 just to see one of the other meteorites he has down there. I'm going to let him tell you about it. It is my honor and privilege tonight to introduce Steve Britt.
Well, Rich gives me far too much credit. first of all, I hate public speaking, so I will apologize in advance. Secondly, I'm not used to holding the microphone, and I need to hold this thing too, so we'll see how well I do. If you can't hear me in the back, holler out or something, and I'll try to hold it close to my mouth. And the other thing I'd like to apologize for is, I've never been to this venue. I set this display up. I encourage anybody at the end that's interested to come up and ask questions, look at things. There's a meteorite versus wrong box. You can test your ability to predict what you think are and aren't meteorites. But the lighting's not very good. So maybe we'll shine our cell phones on it or something if you want. But with that, I will go ahead. Oh, and I did not volunteer to give this talk. He twisted my arm. I'm not that giving and proactive, so, but thank you. Thank you. All right. So Rich asked me to talk today a little about meteorites. A wise man once told me, he said, start off with a joke. That way, even if people hate the talk, they'll get a smile out of it. So here's a cartoon. I don't know if you can read it in the back. It says, you're kidding. I was struck twice by lightning too. The reason why I picked this one is because your chances of finding a meteorite are probably about as good. And we'll talk about why as we go through and maybe increase your odds a bit. There it is. So before we talk about how you might, the other thing I have to apologize for, I don't know anything about metal detectors, so I'm probably going to say the wrong things. Go ahead and laugh, that'll be part of the fun part of the talk too. In fact, I have a metal detector. Rich said, oh, what do you have? And I had to go into the closet to read the number off the box. And to this day, I can tell you some mind lab and that's it. He probably remembers which one it is, but not me. So we're going to talk a little about how meteorites form, what's inside of them, and that'll give you a better idea how they might react to your metal detectors. So in the solar system, there we go. When the solar system was young, it was a swirling nebula full of gas and dust. And the gas in the inner solar system started to coalesce toward the center, and my laser doesn't really show on this, but toward the center here, and that would eventually become our sun. The dust started gathering little dust bunnies, not unlike what you vacuum. When you see the sun igniting there, because so much gas and so much pressure caused it to basically to ignite and create a shock wave, that shock wave propagated out and melted all those little dust bunnies into little spheres. Those spheres continue to accumulate into what we know as the solid planets. And then in the outer part of the solar system, the remaining gases accreted and coalesced into what we know as the gas giants, Saturn and Jupiter and Uranus and Neptune. So 85% of all the meteorites on the ground that you're going to find or could find are stone meteorites. And they are basically these chondrules are made up of those small spheres that we were talking about. If you were to grab a chondrite meteorite and look at it, there's a couple things you'd notice. You might notice a black fusion crust. We'll talk more about that in a second. But if you crack one open, you'll notice those little spheroids we were talking about. And they range anywhere from a millimeter to 10 or 12 millimeters in diameter, but that's about it. And you can see some in this kind of blow up here. If I were to slice that meteorite and polish it, here you can see the variation in the sizes of those chondrules and also what's inside of those chondrules, because those chondrules have everything necessary to create a planet. Everything that you see in this room started off within chondrules, like in these chondrite meteorites that we see. So that dark outside is called fusion crust. This was an event that happened in 2003 over Park Forest in Chicago, a suburb of Chicago. There are pieces of that meteorite here if you choose to come up afterwards and look. But that's supposed to keep moving. Sorry. And meteorites hit our atmosphere at an average of about 94,000 miles an hour. So that's hypersonic velocities. And what happens is the outside gets so hot, it starts ablating away. And what it leaves is this black fusion crust that you see on this meteorite over here. Those little thumbprints are called regnoblimps, and that's where that hypersonic air swirls around. It can actually dig into little pockets like that. You might see it, you might not see it. You can see areas that are smooth. There we go. An interesting thing about meteors, now in space they're called meteoroids. When they're flying through our atmosphere and fireballs are called meteors, and when they hit the ground they're called meteorites. And the interesting thing about meteoroids is they've been in space for billions of years, and they've lost all their heat. So they're near absolute zero, which is minus 459 degrees Fahrenheit. As it's burning through our atmosphere, and that's really a misnomer. It's not burning, it's ablating, because that very cold interior is protecting everything but a paper-thin outside layer, which is the part that's creating all those flames and everything that we see. And when it slows down enough to where it's not getting hot anymore, that outer silicate, remember these are stone meteorites, that outer silicate, molten silicate, instantly gets cooled off by that minus 400 plus degree Fahrenheit temperature, and it'll actually shrink and crack. And so a lot of things if you see a relatively fresh meteorite, you'll see cracks like that. People will say, oh, I saw a meteorite hit the ground, I picked it up, it burnt my hand. If they say that, they're lying. Because when a meteorite hits the ground, the first thing it'll do is form frost, because the inside is just that cold. So as we saw in that video, these little chondrules kept accreting into bigger and bigger masses and sweeping through and collecting more material and eventually becoming the planets. Because of the heat from these bodies kind of bumping into each other and sticking, and also because of a lot of short-lived radioactive elements which have long since decayed, it heated up these bodies and they started to liquefy. And when they liquefied, all the metal, which was principally nickel iron, gravitated toward the center, and all the silicon material floated up toward the top. And then after about 200 million years, things started to cool off, and that's how we got our inner solid planets in the solar system. Now, the interesting part about that is, here is Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. There should have been a fifth planet. There was a body that was accreting there, trying to become a planet, but every time Jupiter would swing by, because it has a massive gravitational field, it would accelerate these things, so instead of bumping together and sticking and becoming bigger and bigger masses, they would crash into each other and break apart. And the result is the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, which is where 99 and 44/100% of all the meteorites come from. So, given that this body that was trying to create its, in the asteroid belt is now lots of pieces that are, sometimes falling toward the sun and we get in the way, and that's how we get meteorites. The core of that body gives rise to what we call the nickel iron meteorites. And here's an example of one right here, and we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. The nickel iron meteorites. The nickel iron meteorites represent about 4.5% of all meteorites that we found today. So when we think of meteorites, a lot of people think of the nickel iron ones, but they're actually the less common. It's the stones that are more common. If you find a fresh one, like this one sitting up here, its fusion crust will be dark, but it'll be kind of a dark bluish gray almost. But if it's sat in the desert, like the Egyptian desert where this Gebel Kamilki sat, they'll rust out, and it won't have, in fact, you can completely lose the fusion crust. You can lose a lot of the angular features, the regoliths. We talked about the thumbprints. You see a lot of them on this piece, none in that Gebel Kamil. So, the likelihood of you finding a fresh meteorite is less than finding one that's been on the ground for a while. And if it's been on the ground for a while, it's not going to look like that. But if you cut one open and you polish it, it'll be real pretty, shiny, almost mirror-like light gray. And then if you hit it with acid, you'll see these crystalline structures. There's a slice of one up here. You can come up and look at it a little later. These crystalline structures only form when molten nickel iron cools very slowly. And in space, it loses about 1 degree per 1,000 years because there's no air to take the heat away. On Earth, everything cools much faster. It won't form those patterns. If you see those patterns when you cut into something, you know it's a meteorite. So at the boundary between the core and the mantle of that body that was trying to form is where we find the stony iron meteorites. Stony iron meteorites are some of the rarest. They represent about 1% of the meteorites found to date. And they come in a couple of different forms. One is called a mesosiderite, this one right here. The mesositerites are kind of a mix of silicates and nickel iron, and so it can be kind of a dull gray and not very attractive. But in pallasites, the silicates have kind of bound together and turned into very pretty translucent olivine crystals, which you can see like in this backlit one here. So those crystals are surrounded by nickel iron, but you know, they're very unique, and in fact, you can facet those things, and people have made jewelry out of these crystals. And then finally, we have what we call the achondrite meteorites. Why are they called achondrite? Well, remember, the chondrites are full of these little chondrules. But when the planets were forming, those chondrules would melt. And so when we got the differentiation of the body that we talked about that broke apart in the asteroid belt, all this was left in the mantle and the silicate, or sorry, the mantle and the upper mantle and crust. Sorry, I told you I wasn't a public speaker. The only material that was left is this kind of chondrule-free material that we call achondrites. 6% of all the meteorites that we have found to date are achondrites. Achondrites are also stones, so when you add that to the 85% that are chondrites, you know, that's almost, what, 94% of the meteorites are actually rocks. You know, they're not going to be these pretty metal ones that people are kind of used to. Most of the achondrites come from the asteroid Vesta, which is the second largest body in the asteroid belt. Some are thought to have also come from the asteroid Ceres, which is the largest. They come into three groups. One's called the howardite, one's called the eucrite, one's called the diogenite. They call it the head class, or HED. The howardites are really a mix of the eucrites and the diogenites. The eucrites are, think of it as a rubble pile of something hit and kind of, you know, fused it all together into a breccia. This slice here is probably about this long. So these clasts here that look a little like chondrules really aren't, because again, you will not find chondrules in achondrite meteorites. And then the diogenites have a lot of olivine in them. Olivine is these things that are very translucent that we were talking about. And in fact, some of those are pretty backlit as well. But the most interesting source of achondrite meteorites are Mars and the Moon. If something hits either of those bodies hard enough, it'll create a crater. The crater will eject material at speeds fast enough to overcome the gravitational pull of those bodies, and then that material will fall toward the sun. If we're lucky, we get in the way. Now the cool thing about it is we get free delivery of lunar rocks. We spent $9 billion in 1969 to go to the moon. I don't know how many dollars that is today. And everything we brought back came from the equator, because it had to land on the equator because that was the easiest place to take off from. So it turns out meteorites come from all over the moon. So we know more about the moon from lunar meteorites than we do from the Apollo missions. Similarly, we've yet to bring back a rock from Mars. We spend a lot of money thinking about how to go there and do it, but we get them for free. You know, Mars kind of sends them. But the point is that meteorites are very scientifically important for the reasons we talked about here, and chondrites represent the oldest material in the solar system. They're 4.5 billion years old, these little spheres that we talk about. So they're very important in helping us understand how our solar system formed as well. Again, they're important, they're great to catch, they're great to find. Good luck. All right, so now we've talked a little about what meteorites are, what's inside some of them, you know, what the differences are, and so now we can talk a little about what it means for metal detection. And again, from an amateur that knows nothing about metal detectors. So chondrite meteorites. Remember, we talked about the fact that they have all sorts of elements in them. They have a surprising amount of nickel iron in them. Usually it's microscopic, but sometimes you can see it in little blebs, sometimes you can see it in veins. I have some examples up here. We can hit it with a little spot metal. I lied, I have a spot metal detector too. We can hit it and we can show you that this plain looking rock is actually full of metal, even though you can't see it. Now there's three kinds of stone chondrite meteorites. There's H, meaning high amounts of metal. This is an H, you can tell when you put a metal detector next to it. There's L for low amounts, and LL, which is low amounts that is not all nickel iron. Those last two are kind of hard to find. So I understand the proper use of a metal detector. Around here we have a lot of iron in the soil, so you have to kind of adjust to discriminate out for that. And by the time you do, you've discriminated out for all the metal in the L and LL type meteorites. But the H chondrites, the H type with a lot of nickel iron in them, are a lot easier to find. Nickel iron meteorites, on the other hand, they're almost all metal. They're really easy to find. You just have to stumble across a few. You know, I say 99 to 100%. The 99% is kind of interesting. If you cut one of these open, you'll see other alloys besides nickel iron. Troilite, Schreibersite. Troilite's kind of a gold color that's kind of pretty. But you'll also occasionally see little pockets of carbon. And when these things collide in space, they can collide with enough force to shock that carbon into black diamonds. There are no natural black diamonds that were created on Earth. Black diamonds only come from two places, Brazil and the Central African Republic. Turned out, you know, several hundred million years ago, when everything was just one big body before the continents split apart and drifted, those two were right next to each other. And they think that about 1 billion years ago, a meteorite hit and deposited all the black diamonds that we know of today. So, so they're kind of interesting, but honestly, they're not very attractive, which is why you can get them pretty cheap. Stony iron meteorites, you know, the pretty ones like this, there's usually more metal than silicates in there. They're easy to find with a metal detector. Even the Meteorites, the kind of ugly looking ones, they'll have a minimum of 17 to 20% nickel iron in them, metal in them. So again, they're going to be easy to find. But the achondrite meteorites, remember, those came from those differentiated bodies. All the metal went into the core and formed these kinds of meteorites. So the achondrites, there's no metal in them. They're going to be nearly impossible to find. But hey, give it a shot.
If Rob was there, it'd be a horseshoe, but he'd think it's a meteorite.
All right, so we talked about, you know, different kinds of meteorites. We talked about how they might, you know, react to them, you know, with a metal detector. Where should we expect to find them if we want to go looking for them? There's been 70,000 meteorites found to date. Well, it seems like a lot. But 47,000 of them have been found in Antarctica. Now, Antarctica is about 1.5 times bigger than the United States, and there are less than 2,000 recognized meteorites found in the United States. Canada, which is similar in size, area-wise to the United States, 71, and that's it. So let's talk about why that might be. Here's a map of the United States. Alaska's not to scale. Here's, or Hawaii. Here's the United States, and those numbers indicate how many meteorites have been found in each state. You can see up in the Pacific Northwest, where we live, not a whole lot. So part of that is because, you know, there's a lot of forest and stuff, and it's obviously going to be harder to find. And if it's rainier, they're going to rust out. And so, you know, the chances are a lot less. The bulk of the meteorites found down in here, like in Nevada, Arizona, those were found during the Dust Bowl in the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, when everything was arid, there was no vegetation, it was easy to walk out there and find anything that didn't quite look right. It's a lot harder today. Texas owns the record of 313, and yet Alaska is significantly bigger and has only found 4. And remember, Antarctica, 47,000. Why is that? Well, if you're walking across that white ice and you see a black rock, there's only one place it came from. There's no In fact, if you look up through that point, you can see another one way out in the distance. And these scientists will jump on their snowmobiles and they'll head on out there and they just look for black rocks. Interestingly enough, two interesting points. One is nickel iron meteorites are a lot harder to find. Not just because there's fewer of them, but because the sun hits them, they get a little warm and they start sinking down in the ice and they all get buried. The other thing is that Antarctic meteorites are illegal to sell or trade. There's an international treaty that was ratified back, I think, in the 70s that said, you know what, these are only for scientific purposes. You want to collect them, they have to go for scientific study. 3 got out before the treaty was ratified. I have a piece of one of them, and I can tell you it's very lackluster. It's just a common chondrite meteorite. The only thing impressive about it is where it's from. So, you know, not all the meteorites you find in Antarctica are cool, but a lot of them are. So there's no reason to think the meteorites should fall preferentially. And in fact, if you look at all the finds in the United States, you know, except for the Pacific Northwest for reasons we talked about, it's, you know, there's no obvious concentrations or lack thereof. Idaho only has 9 recognized meteorites to its name. And I can tell you that one of those 9 is not from Idaho. It was found someplace else, brought into Idaho, thrown on the ground, and they said, oh, look what I found. So, there were only 8. Now the one that Rich was talking about is the Jerome, which is the first stone meteorite recognized as having been found in the gem state. It's about this big. I can show you a picture of it later. The interesting thing about it, it was observed to fall in 52. It was found in 54, and in 55 it went into a basement and sat there for 65 years until the estate got sold. And that's when I was called to try to figure out, you know, what this was. And it turned out through some research and stuff, it is Idaho's first stone meteorite. So if you're interested in those kinds of things, it'll be in my display case this weekend.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
So let's try to figure out how many meteorites should be on the ground. We're going to talk about what's happened since the Ice Age ended 10,000 years ago. Why? Because anything before that, the glaciers would have ground up into dust and you're not going to find anything. But in the last 10,000 years, 14 million meteorites have hit the United States alone. Now we know that, well, we estimate that based on the fact that for decades now we've been tracking meteors that hit the atmosphere. We look at the seismic impact when they hit the ground. 40 tons of meteorite dust hit the atmosphere every day. Fortunately, it's dust. The big ones come a lot less frequently, which is good because they hurt when they hit you. If you do the math, that's 3.7 per square mile. And if you extend that to the area of Idaho, there's over 300,000 meteorites on the ground in Idaho. We've only found 8. So obviously, they're not easy to find. Get your metal detectors, get out there, you know what to look for. So I couldn't find a good cartoon that was relevant to this section, so there. Just something to break up the monotony. You know, it took me a while. You know, when I first put this in there, I practiced this talk a whole mess of times, not actually verbally, just in my head. And it wasn't probably till the 4th or 5th time that I realized those are dinosaurs. All right, so now you know there's a lot out there. You kind of know what to look for. Let's summarize it. Now these are rules of thumb, and what that means is every rule of thumb is made to be broken, but the exceptions are few. Chondrite meteorites, if they're fresh, meaning if they just kind of hit the ground not too long ago, they're going to have a dark, kind of a matted fusion crust. Occasionally you'll see redwood lips, but nothing like you see in the nickel iron meteorites. If you break one open, those small round chondrules, that's what you really want to look for because that's pretty demonstrative. That pretty much says, yep, this is a meteorite. All stone chondrite meteorites, 85% of all stone meteorites, or of all meteorites, will be attracted to a magnet. Remember, the chondrites, that's what. And people like to show me pumice. It's like, oh, it's a meteorite. It's like, nope, meteorites don't have bubbles. Stone meteorites, you will not find bubbles. The chondrite meteorites, remember that all the nickel iron is gone. That kind of went to what would have become the core of that planetoid. So it's more silicates, and the fusion crust isn't kind of matte like this, but it's really glossy. It's real shiny, almost like glass. But it won't have any chondrules, so it's going to look a lot more like common rocks that we find on the ground. No magnetic attraction for the reasons that we talked about. And again, no bubbles, except occasionally, especially in really rare ones like angrites, you'll see little, what we call vugs or vesicles, which are just small little they look a little like bubbles, And there were gases were trapped. In fact, you have trapped gases that we find in the Martian meteorites, which is how we know they're from Mars. But as a rule, if there's anything, not very many. The stony iron meteorites, those are going to have kind of the same dark bluish gray fusion crust that you see here. They'll occasionally have regoliths, not very often, but in the pallasites you'll see those pretty crystals sticking through the fusion crust. So that's typically a dead giveaway for a pallasite meteorite. Obviously they'll be attracted to a magnet and no bubbles. They can have cracks. We'll talk more about that in a second. And the nickel iron meteorites, here's a real fresh one. It fell in 1947, but it was picked up within a week of the fall. And so you can see the color of the fusion crust that you would expect to see on fresh nickel iron meteorites. And lots of regoliths. If you cut one open, the interior will always be that really bright silvery metal. It will never be dark. If you acid etch it, you're going to see patterns like we see on here. Those patterns can be more irregular depending on how much nickel is mixed with the iron, but you'll always see some kind of crystallization. Remember I said there's an exception to every rule. Ataxites have so much nickel in them they just turn into one big crystal, and they will not have a pattern. But if you find an ataxite, you're doing really good because those are incredibly rare. And no bubbles, but they can have stress cracks. And in fact, if you look at this slice up here, you can see 3 stress cracks aligned with the boundaries of the crystal structures in that meteorite. So everything I know about meteorites actually came from this cartoon book that was published in 2018. It's 48 pages. It was targeted to kids. It's like, how can you tell a meteorite from a meteor wrong? I actually just learned about this when I was looking for cartoons to put in here from you guys. And I'm going to get this book, because I could probably learn something from it. So we talked about meteorites. Let's talk about meteor rocks. Geologists like to take a rock and run it across the wall or whatever and see what kind of streak it leaves. For all you guys who like Big Bang and, Sheldon hates geologists, so, that's my dig at geologists. Meteorites will never leave a streak. Actually, I have nothing against geologists because I like rocks too. If it has pumice-like bubbles, again, not a meteorite. Interestingly enough, no meteorites found so far contain quartz. Sometimes you'll see some of the silicates shocked into glass, which can look like quartz because it's clear, but so far no quartz has been found. And typically a meteorite is not going to be round unless it's been sitting out long enough that it's kind of weathered away, like in the Sahara Desert, the wind will blow. This, I was going to pass these around, but it's kind of hard to throw them between tables. So this is a highly weathered meteorite. I'll pass them right to you. Here's another one. Well, here's a meteor wrong. I can pass a wrong around too if you want.
All right, I know you guys aren't the brightest. The really, really big one is wrong. All right? Big, wrong.
But usually if they're rounded or oval in shape or whatever, they wouldn't burn through the atmosphere like that. Those are probably good. There's a guy in Gardenia, California that sells river rocks, and he gives these wonderful descriptions. And he puts meteoritical bulletin listings that says, this is from my personal collection, it's this fall, $300,000. And there are a few people that have been stupid enough to buy those. Don't, okay? Just don't. Now, if it's metal and it has hematite in it, that's not a meteorite. Hematite has not been found in meteorites. If it's malleable, it bends easily, it's not a meteorite. Nickel iron is very strong. In fact, some people believe that the sword Excalibur was real, and that this legendary strength was attributed to the fact that it was made from a meteorite that somebody found. Back then, their smelters and things could only make pretty brittle iron. So, if it was a piece of meteorite, it would make a wonderful sword. If it has dendritic features, it's not a meteorite. What do I mean by dendritic features? Well, you see this crystalline structure in meteorites. When they did surface mining, they would create slag around here, and so you get these chunks of iron that actually look surprisingly like meteorites. When they would rust out, it would almost look like fusion crust. But they cool really fast sitting on the ground, and when they cool, you get these kind of stress cracks that look almost, I don't know if you know what dendrites are, but think of them as squiggly little cracks or voids or whatever. So they look a little like crystals, but in fact they're not. So that's a good giveaway that it's slag. And if you can find somebody that has the right kind of equipment and can test for nickel, high-grade nickel ore only has about 2% nickel, and that's considered a lot. Meteorites start at 4, typically 10 to 15%, and they go up to, up to 30%. So if there's a lot of nickel mixed with the iron, that's a good indication it's a meteorite. If not, it's a meteorite. So let's do just a quick summary here and talk about why these are meteorites. The slag up here, this is man-made. It's not metal slag, but you can tell because it's got a lot of the bubbles and holes in it. It's also got these kind of smooth, almost petroleum features. You don't find that in meteorites. The iron concretion next to it, again, those kind of lumps and stuff, that would never happen going through our atmosphere. The basalt, the pumice, the lava rock, too many bubbles. That slag that you see over here, that can fool you. I've been fooled. But if you cut it open and you look inside and you apply a couple of these tests we're talking about, you can tell that it's not a meteorite. Iron oxide will look like this. That chocolatey color looks a little like Gebel-Camil meteorite that we saw a little area there. But again, kind of those rounded features and stuff, not a meteorite. And hematite, enough said. So here's a little interesting factoid. Up until the very, very early 1800s, all the, and I say this with quotes, scholars could not admit that rocks could come from space. That was not Earth-centric. So there are all sorts of theories of where meteorites came from, and one of them was that the ash from volcanoes would coalesce in the air, lightning would hit them, glue them together, and the black around it was created by the lightning. Well, that's just plain wrong. And hence, this cartoon. So, we kind of know what to look for. We know what not to look for. How big should we expect to find them? We're only going to talk about the stone meteorites because, as we kind of mentioned, that's about 92% of meteorites. The chondrites and the achondrites are stone. 50% of those weigh less than 10 ounces, a quarter of a kilo. Not very big. 75% of all the stone meteorites that are found weigh less than 2.5 pounds. 90% weigh less than 12 pounds. The chance of finding something big is not very high. Why is that? Because these stone meteorites, remember, they're really cold, they're getting really hot on the outside, and those stresses just cause those things to break apart. So they may start out big, but they don't end up very big. This guy here, this weighs a little over 8 pounds. It's bigger than 85% of all the stone meteorites ever found. So that gives you an idea on kind of the sizes of things. Oh yeah, I already said that, sorry. I'm going to give you a specific example. This meteorite fell 10 years ago over Russia. So this month, actually. When it hit the atmosphere, it weighed 12,000 tons. By the time it hit the ground, only 66 tons of material was left. And that material broke into thousands and thousands of pieces mid-flight. The biggest piece that was ever found was about 1,200 pounds. But this is a histogram of how many meteorites were found, by weight. And you can see that most of them are only in the couple of gram range. And in fact, if you look at the median point in this plot, it's asymmetric, so you want the same area on one side as the other. But that green line represents the median point, and it's only 5 grams. So to put that in context, I was going to do this as kind of a test and say, okay, guess how many, kind of like jelly beans, guess how many meteorites are in this vial, and the person that gets it closest, I'll give a meteorite to, but there's just too many people and stuff. So now I don't have to give a meteorite away. So this vial, all the meteorites in here on average are about that 5-ish grams, 93. So again, when you're out there looking for meteorites, don't be surprised if they're really small. And everyone always asks, gee, how much is my meteorite worth? And honestly, you're probably not going to retire. This guy right here, 50 cents to $1 a gram. You know, and we said like these Shelly ovens are 5-10 grams. They actually go for $5 to $10 a gram, which is still not talking about a whole lot. There are some meteorites, some very rare kinds, that have gone for as much as $25,000 a gram. These lunar meteorites, I got a bunch of lunar meteorites here. Lunar meteorites used to go for several $1,000s a gram. I should tell you a story about me letting a kid lick one time. But they could go for several $1,000s a gram. But recently they found tons of them in Algeria, and now they're down to, you know, $15, $20, $30, $40 a gram. So, yeah, you're not going to retire, but it's still fun to find one and say, hey, look, I found a meteorite. I'm going to end the talk here, because I know you guys are probably tired of listening to me. I'm going to end the talk with a couple of things. Rich said, if you really want to appeal to these guys, bring a coin. These guys love to find coins. It's like, okay, there's 3 coins right there, and they're not made out of meteorites. But, one of them has Apollo sitting on a meteorite. One of them has an eagle on what they call the Stone of Emsa. This is a holy stone that is enshrined in Mecca, and the annual pilgrimage that the Muslims do. One of the things they do is they worship this. It was actually stolen centuries ago, and they got it back in like 7 or 8 pieces, and now you're not even allowed to take pictures of it. Oops, sorry. And then the last one here is a comet that appeared just after Julius Caesar died. The interesting thing about comets are, everyone says, well, it's not a meteorite. Well, no, it's not. It's ice covered, you know, it's got those beautiful tails. Except, in the middle of it, it's a carbonaceous chondrite meteorite. So if a comet hits the ground, you're still going to find pieces of meteorite. But probably the coolest thing, because I can't tell you for sure that any of these 3 zones are actually found with metal detectors, although that's real common for these guys in England and over there to do that. The coolest thing ever is this guy. In 1947, another big meteorite fall hit Russia. They just tend to be unlucky. The Sokotia-Lean meteorite fell, it was seen going almost parallel to the ground for 1,500 miles. It was 10:36 in the morning. It was casting shadows behind people as it went. It was so hot. It got so hot traveling that far that it exploded 3 different times. This is out of a Russian journal that kind of maps where it exploded and how many pieces of shrapnel versus big pieces hit the ground and made craters. They found all sorts of pieces, some embedded in trees. Well, 72 years after the fall, and I know this Russian, and he's the one that I actually got this from. You can come and see it later if you want. This little piece of meteorite embedded in the tree, and the tree grew around it. And so he was out there with a metal detector. They go out today still trying to find more pieces. This was a huge fall. And he was running up and down a tree, and it lit up, and he cut the tree down. He took that piece back, ground it away, and there you go. There's the meteorite. And you can see the tree rings around it. You can see, it's not in the picture, but you can see actual sap that bled and hardened, and the tree grew around that. So, you know, don't be afraid to stick your metal detector up on a tree to see. So that's the end of the formal part of my talk. Before I turn it over to questions, I've already had a few people come up and say, hey, do you think this is a meteorite or whatever, and there might be more. Let me say that I'm more than happy to take a look, but I'm not a meteorologist. Not that there's anything wrong with that. My apologies to Jerry Seinfeld. More importantly, I'm not a meteoriticist, because meteorologists, weather, meteoriticists, those are the guys you want to talk to. I'm not one of those either. And I didn't bring anything to test your rocks with, because to do an accurate test, you need equipment that costs tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars and fill up half a room. I don't have any of those either. But I do have lots of opinions. So, I'll tell you whether I think it might or might not be a meteorite. And if we think it might be, or you want to have a test that I can tell you where you can send it. I don't make any money on it, so I have no vested interest, but I can give you the information. So, other than if you want to see a picture of the Jerome meteorite that you were saying, I put that someplace. This was a test, eye chart test. Okay, here you go. So the Jerome meteorite is that one right up there in the back corner. And it's got a really amazing story that spanned like, well, not 20 years at least. There's a slice of the second meteorite that you see to the right of it. That meteorite was found in the same field almost 20 years to the day after the Jerome meteorite. And it's been sold all over the world as the Jerome meteorite, but it's never been classified. It is not, despite being in museums in Russia, several in the US, all over the world. And then this is a meteoritic anvil. It actually fell this way and hit the ground looking like this. And the Namibians in Africa used it for centuries to pound artifacts and other tools out of smaller pieces of meteorite from that fall. Here's some spear points made out of meteorites and a lot of chondrites where you can see better examples of the chondrules and things, and you know, just a number of stuff. So if you're interested, that case should be there tomorrow night. So it'll be there this weekend. If not, it'll be in Caldwell at the O'Connor Field Museum at their show next weekend. All right, so that's my talk. Any questions? Oh, yes, sir.
So there's a large crater just north of Mount Home on the desert. Has there been anything found out of there?
You know, there's a lot of debate on whether that's an actual meteorite crater or not. No, to date, there's not been anything found there. So I couldn't tell you this. There's the old Rand McNally, say that right? Sure. Maps. They show just over the border in Nevada, off of 93, a little place called Meteor. And it's no longer on any of the maps. And I went down there and I said, hey, you know, I talked to some old timers like me. I said, hey guys, you know, what's this about? And he just gave me this cold look and he said, yeah, well, they thought they were meteors, but they're not. You know, and I kind of think there's something there. And they just don't let people, you know, looking. So that might be a place if you can find an old map that shows where that is. Any other questions? All right, so like I said, there's some interactive stuff up here. There's some of the examples you can take a more close look at if you'd like. And other than that, thank you very much for your attendance.